All right, am I on? All right, hey, I'm on, man. Hey, how's it going, guys? Good to see you all this morning. Hey, good to be with you all. Hey, if I haven't met you before, my name is Robbie. I'm one of the pastors here on staff. I get to hang out with our awesome high schoolers and middle schoolers, and get to help out with really serving the families here. So it's great to be up here with you guys. Great to be able to spend this morning. And hey, and like Mark was saying, because I know some of you are also tuning in online, and so, man, you can also just leave a comment, let us know you're there. We love to get a chance to meet you, connect with you that way. So I'm kind of curious for you guys. Have you ever had a moment, or maybe can you think of a time where you felt like, man, I just really need some good news? You guys think of that? Maybe you just kind of kept getting like bad news over and over again, and it felt like, man, just, like kind of bad news comes in threes kind of vibe. And maybe you're like, oh man, I need some good news. I need something to be excited about, something to really just kind of boost my spirits a little bit. And I know, I was thinking about that question for myself, like, man, do I remember a moment where I really needed some good news? And I remember, I think probably a lot of us maybe fell in this category, but I instantly went back to March and April of 2020, right? A season where I felt like in that season, like every time I turned on the TV, it was more bad news. It was like, oh, okay, you kept hearing about how widespread COVID was spreading. You heard about, people losing jobs. You heard about, the death toll was rising. And I just remember, I just kept getting like almost just disaster fatigue, where it's just like, man, I just keep hearing this bad news. And I remember thinking like, dude, I just need some good news. I need someone just to kind of, something lighthearted, something that's just going to just, at least for a moment, have a reprieve. And I don't know if you guys, I think, Mark, you might have mentioned this in your email, but it was awesome because during that time, a guy by the name of John Krasinski actually started a really, really, really sweet, it was funny, it was lighthearted, but he did something literally called Some Good News, right? And the whole idea, he kind of created this almost like a fake news broadcast, but instead of just talking about bad news, he would talk about some of the really heartwarming things that were happening during that season. Like there was one where he talked about this girl who was struggling through cancer, and she was able to become cancer free, and just this video of her coming home and all of her neighbors on the sidewalk clapping and cheering for her, or like the videos of you see all the healthcare workers that were being celebrated, or at one point, he had the whole cast of Hamilton come on Zoom and sing to this girl who wanted to go to see Hamilton, but it got canceled because of the pandemic, and so he wrangled the whole cast to do like a Zoom version of that. Like, how cool would that be? First off, that'd be pretty cool. I would love that. Personally, I would love it if he could have wrangled like the Backstreet Boys to come and sing "I Want It That Way" on Zoom. Like, that would have been more my speed. I love Hamilton, but he can't be "I Want It That Way." But the thing is, right, like we all can think of probably a moment where we needed some good news. And this morning, what I love is, we're talking about Palm Sunday, we're talking about this passage in Isaiah. It's kind of exactly what we get, right? That this morning, we get to take a look at how God offers us some really, really great news through the prophet Isaiah. And this is coming to a group of people that were really starving for some good news, right? Some people that really, because of decisions that their community has made, they'd really suffered a lot. They experienced a lot of consequences for their decisions, and they were at a moment where they just needed some good news. And so maybe you're in here this morning as we're talking about that. Maybe you're in a season that kind of like what I was referring to, where it felt like you just gotten a lot of bad news and you need some good news. And maybe you're not necessarily in that drastic of a season, but maybe what I would just say is, I think, regardless of where we're at, my hope is that the words we're going to hear from Isaiah this morning are going to be equally encouraging, that they're going to be hopeful, and they're going to be encouraging. It's not because of anything that is in us, right? It's not like a motivational kind of encouragement we're going to get, but it's an encouragement of who Jesus is, what he's done, and that hope that we can grasp onto because of that. But to really understand the depth of that, right, to really understand the depth of that good news, we have to kind of understand the context, right, that Isaiah was speaking into. We have to understand what was happening at the time that he was sharing this good news that God was speaking through him. Now, I don't know how familiar you guys are with, like, kind of the prophets, the Old Testament prophets, but the prophets were like, at this time, that they were that they were a group of people that served as God's mouthpiece to his people, right? That they served as a mouthpiece. A lot of times they were calling out sin, that they were calling people back to God, people that had drifted away, and he was calling them back to them. And a lot of times, right, that when we hear about the prophets, we think of them as just being predictive, but that's not necessarily, like, that wasn't just what their role was. They were a lot of, hey, recognizing the sin in their people and calling them back to God, calling them back to relationship with God. And a lot of the prophets that would speak, that we read about in the Old Testament, were speaking in really, really tumultuous times, right? A lot of them were speaking at times when there was a coming invasion from another massive empire. And one of these guys that was speaking is Isaiah, right? And Isaiah was, for him, he lived, I think we have a map of the divided kingdom. You have Israel and Judah, and Isaiah, that he was speaking in the capital of Judah at that time, in Jerusalem, right? And for him, he was speaking at a time when that there's this massive empire called Assyria that was coming, and there was a coming invasion. So a lot of his message, especially the chapters 1 to 39 of Isaiah, are speaking into this context. He's speaking in this context of Assyria's coming, and he's calling his people and saying, hey, that there is sin that you're committing, and you've turned away from God. I'm calling you to come back to him, because there are consequences if we don't. And so today we're going to be jumping at verse 40, and what's really fascinating about Isaiah is, right, that when you get to verse 40, it's kind of like a turning point in the passage. That like we said, in verse 1 to 39, he's speaking in the people of Jerusalem, and he's warning them of this coming invasion, warning them of the consequences of not turning back to God. And then in chapter 40, not only does the theme change, but also the setting changes. Right, that in verse 40 now, that he picks up that where the setting takes place is, right, that they have been conquered that the people of Jerusalem have been overcome by the kingdom of Babylon, and they have been exiled. And now he's saying that, hey, yes, like this, that what I was warning you about, the consequences, maybe it wasn't Assyria, but Babylon ended up coming later on, right? We know about Assyria with Hezekiah, and they didn't overcome Judah, but Babylon did. And Isaiah's warning is telling them, like, hey, now that you're in exile, a lot of people were starting to wonder, man, do we totally botch our relationship with God? Are we totally without hope? Is there ever hope of us coming back to God? Did we just totally fracture our relationship beyond repair? And that's what Isaiah speaks into, right? And in this moment where people feel like, man, we really messed up. God, can we ever fix this? Isaiah gives a moment he speaks a message of hope and comfort to a broken people. And that's what we're going to pick up this morning, right? This is the setting of, even though you feel, even though that you've alienated yourselves from God, there's still hope for you. There's hope that you can that relationship can be redeemed, can be reconciled. And so I actually want to read this passage. It's Isaiah 40 verses 1 to 11. And I want to, if you want to read along with me, you can, or if you just want to hear these words. But as I'm reading this, I want you to put yourself in the perspective of who this main audience was at the time. Right? People who, like I said, have felt like, man, we have messed up. We've messed up, and man, we don't know if there's any hope of us being reconciled. And then these are the words, right? They're not in their original home, and then these are the words that get spoken to them through the prophet Isaiah. Comfort, comfort my people, says your God. Speak tenderly to Jerusalem and proclaim to her that her hard service has been completed, that her sin has been paid for, that she has received from the Lord's hand double for all her sins. A voice of one calling in the wilderness, prepare the way for the Lord, make straight in the desert a highway for our God. Every valley shall be raised up, every mountain and hill made low. The rough ground shall become level, and the rugged places a plain, and the glory of the Lord will be revealed, and all the people will see it together, for the mouth of the Lord has spoken. A voice says, cry out, and I said, what shall I cry? All people are like grass, and all their faithfulness is like the flowers of the field. The grass withers and the flowers fall, because the breath of the Lord blows on them. Surely the people are grass. The grass withers and the flowers fall, but the word of the Lord endures forever. But who brings good news to Zion? Go up on a high mountain. You who bring good news to Jerusalem, lift up your voice with a shout. Lift it up. Do not be afraid. Say to the towns of Judah, here is your God. See, the sovereign Lord comes with power, and he rules with a mighty arm. See, his reward is with him, and his recompense accompanies him. He tends his flock like a shepherd. He gathers the lambs in his arms, and he carries them close to his heart. And he gently leads those that have young. Right, so the key word, right, is comfort. Right, he says it right at the beginning, comfort my people. And like I said, keep in mind that the people who are hearing this are probably in desperate need of comfort, right? That they have been exiled to Babylon, and they're wondering, man, if they've completely alienated themselves from God and broken their relation with him for good. And then God, when he speaks to them, he outlines kind of reasons why they can take comfort. And he reasons why, like he says, like that's not the case. And in fact, let me give you reasons why. Instead of your heart being troubled, you can take comfort in me, even though your situation seems so bleak. Even though that even as you're seeing how things have happened, you're wondering if your relationship with me is fractured. He goes, here's where you can take comfort in me. And in verses 1 to 2, right, he kind of maps out 4 different reasons why they can take comfort. And he gives the first one in verses 1 to 2. And he says, you can take comfort, he says, because your sin has been paid for. Right? In other words, he tells them that the first reason they can take comfort in him is because their punishment is complete. It's over. Right? That he says, when they were exiled, it was the intent was not to destroy, but for them to experience the consequence of their disobedience. Right? That they had completely turned their back on God, and given to idol worship, but they had also really committed some horrible acts of social injustice to people in their community who were poor, who were really that were really in need. And so he says, like, man, what you experienced was the consequences of your disobedience, but it was never meant to destroy. He goes, he wanted his people to know that the ultimate purpose for them is redemption, not destruction. And so for them, this would have been reassuring because, as we said, they're wondering if, man, did my rebellion completely exile me for God for good? And I love the language he uses, right? When he starts calling them, he calls them my people. He refers to himself as their God. And in doing that, he's using like this covenant language to remind them that even though you were disobedient, even though you had turned your back on me, he says, there's still hope because I'm still your God and you're still my people. I haven't given up on you. That's kind of what God is saying. And I, when I think back to this as like I kind of have almost like my parent lens on, right? Where I see this, it reminds me a lot of like, if you're a parent, you've had to discipline your kids before, and you think about those, man, there have been moments, I can think of a lot of moments where even with me and Ellie, she's gotten older, right? And I've had to correct her, you're trying to discipline her. There's moments where, she does something, I try to correct it and I discipline it, and then she gets kind of sad. She feels like, oh my gosh, I let Dad down. All is lost. I am a worm. She just kind of gets so sad, and instantly I have to say, hey, Daddy still loves you. Like, Daddy loves you. I'm not mad. Like, Daddy just wants to teach you, right? And so I just, as a parent, I feel like I have a lot of these conversations a lot, and with where she's at, where I'm saying, hey, no, Daddy's not mad. Like, Daddy. Listen, like, I just want you to learn. I want you, hey, maybe saying mean things to other people isn't really, that's not really good. Daddy doesn't want you to do that. Or, hey, not sharing with your friend isn't good. Or, hey, maybe rubbing Daddy's belly and asking if there's a baby in there. Maybe that's not the nicest thing to do, right? Like, that's not that. She's done that. That's a real thing. I didn't make that up on the fly. So teaching her things, right? Like, and I think a lot of ways, right, that this is God's heart in this moment. Right, where these people I've messed up, and a lot of them, they realizing like, man, we have blown it. Will God ever take us back? And I almost imagine like God's putting them on his lap and saying, hey, I still love you. Yeah, you goofed up. Yes, you disobeyed me, but I still love you. I'm still your God. You're still my people. And my heart was never to destroy you, but to teach you, was to redeem you. And so for them, the hope is, right, they can take comfort in that. Knowing that God's heart is for them to be redeemed, knowing that God's heart is for them to live and not perish. And so then he moves on, verses 3-5, right? He gives reason number 2. He tells them that God gives them a second reason for comfort by assuring them that he's coming to them, and nothing can keep him from coming to them. Right? He says, and this is worthy of comfort. This is worthy of reassurance. He says, because honestly, God is their only hope. Right? He is their only hope. And one of the things that they had done in the past is they had, instead of trusting in God, they had trusted in their political alliances, where they had trusted in Assyria and they trusted in Babylon. And then over time, you see that these alliances didn't really work out well for them. And so God is telling them, like, man, I want you to trust in me, that these alliances can't help you, they can't save you, but I can, and I'm coming. And so, and he tells them, hey, because I'm coming, goes, and you know what, and there's something you can do. He tells them to prepare the way of the Lord. He tells them to prepare the way. And that's one of the things that was customary, that whenever a king would go to visit a city, it was customary to build a road for him to travel there, and for his entourage to use as they approach the city. And so the path would usually be made as straight and as level as possible, so that way the king could get there as quickly and as easily as possible. And so for God's people, right, as he says, like, just as in the same way as a king would come and you would prepare for that king to come, he says, there is a way that you can prepare for me to come. It's not, obviously, he's not like paving a literal road, right? But what he's saying is like, what can you do is, it starts by trusting that I'm going to show up. It's putting your trust in me and the fact that I am going to show up, I am your hope, and then declaring that truth, right? And sharing that truth. And the cool thing that God promises, he says, when I come, that my glory will be revealed. Meaning that, hey, that who I am is going to be revealed not just to you, but to the world. And that my purpose is to redeem is going to be revealed not just to you, but the world. That God's heart is not just to bring his people out of exile, but to redeem all of his creation. Right? And so he says, for that, man, that we should have comfort and that God is showing up and nothing can stop him. And that they should put all their hope and trust in who God is, and that he promised that he's going to show up. And like, man, that they should be comforted by that. They should be reassured that, man, this is our only hope, and we know this is our only hope of being redeemed, right? And of us being reunited back with God. You know, I'm a big sports fan, as some of you guys may know, and you can pray for me. I'm a Cleveland sports fan, of all places to love sports. And yeah, some of you are like, oh yeah, I know, man. I hear you. And as a sports fan, you know, one of the things is like, I hear a lot of Seattle fans where I talk about, man, our team hasn't been in the playoffs in years. Like for a while, man, Cleveland our whole city hadn't won a championship in like 60 years. Right? And it was brutal. And like, if you look up some of the really great sports miracles have happened, a lot of them have happened against Cleveland. And so like, I heard someone refer once as like, Cleveland sports are like a factory of sadness. And that is so true. And I remember that was just kind of like, we're like, man, we'll never, like, I was resigned, like, I'll probably die before I ever see Cleveland win a championship in my life. Like, that's probably just going to happen. But then in 2014, something really beautiful happened. LeBron James came back to Cleveland, right? And oh my gosh, dude, you should have seen the celebration in Cleveland. Like their billboards went up, right? People were celebrating. People were trying to, because he had left before, so people were trying to glue like their burned up LeBron James jerseys again. But I remember all of us as Cleveland fans, we're sitting there thinking like, all of a sudden our hope of winning a championship got reinvigorated, because we're thinking, man, this is our best. This is I feel like our only hope of being able to see a championship come to Cleveland, right? And for us, and I'm like, okay, well, and so we started to like trust, say, okay, LeBron, you can do it, man. And he did, by the way, spoiler alert, he did in 2016, beat the Golden State Warriors. It was fantastic. Some of you are going, sorry, man, I don't know. I was really excited. Maybe you weren't. I was really excited at that. And I just remember that moment, just like, man, this is our only hope. Right? And I love when I think of this on a much greater scale, right? That there are things that we can put our hope in other things. And I love what he said, what Israel's kind of having to recognize, that the people of Judah, they're recognizing is like, man, our only hope is in God coming to us, This is when it comes to our redemption, when it comes to us being made right with God, it's not going to be anything we can do or anything anyone else can do for us. It's only in him coming to us. And they had to put all of their hope and trust in that. And God says, man, and you can understand, he says, you can have comfort because there's nothing that's going to stop that. There's nothing that's going to stop me from coming to you. And so, and then in verse 6, right, 6 to 8, then he moves to his third reason for having comfort. And this is like, that he talks about that, in the previous section, he talked about God's unstoppable power, but then in verse 6, he shifts from talking about God's unstoppable power to the complete powerlessness of humanity. And he depicts them as grass, right? He kind of gives us metaphors, humanity as being like grass. And when I lived in Montana, right, we had this massive backyard, and it was always really cool in spring because we'd get really lush and green. But it wouldn't last super long because summer would come and then instantly it would just turn brown and like prickly. And you could, in the spring you could run through the grass in your bare feet, but you couldn't do that in the summer because it was like running on splinters. It was just so brittle. And God gives this image of human beings where he says that we shoot up and we grow, but they don't last forever. Like just like the grass, at some point they wither and they die. And you might be wondering, man, where's the comfort in this? This doesn't seem like a real great comforting message. But once again, right, think back to the people that he's speaking to. Right? Think back to the people who had just been conquered by Babylon, just been exiled to Babylon. Right? And they're thinking, and they've probably felt completely powerless to other empires, to other people around them, where they have been subjugated, they have been exiled. And what God is saying is, man, as powerful as some of the massive empires at that time, like Babylon, Persia, Assyria, he says, man, even Egypt, he says, as powerful as these other empires are, even they, just like the grass, will wither. He says, even they are not, they can't stand up against the power of God. Even they can't stop me coming to you. They can't stop me accomplishing my purpose. And since God's purpose is redemption, not destruction, that is great news for them. It says, even these massive, powerful empires can't stop my purpose, what I'm going to do, how I'm going to redeem all of creation. He says, and they can't stop it. And then he wraps up in verses 9 to 11, and he gives this fourth reason why they can take comfort, and why they can really celebrate that is that you can go, I should know the fourth one, and that he talks about his own protective and caring nature. Right? That God gives his people a fourth reason for taking comfort, and that God will rule with a strong arm, and he'll care for his people like a shepherd. At the men's breakfast, Mark kind of talked about paradoxes, and this is almost kind of like a paradox when you think of God's strong arm and him being a shepherd. Right? It seems kind of like you have this massive power, but then this massive gentleness and caring. And what he's talking about when he says ruling with a mighty arm, right, he's talking about that he's going to rule with power, but he's not going to misuse it. He's not going to abuse it like a lot of people have probably seen. And like we've even seen at times, right, the abuse of power. He says instead God's going to use his power to take care of evil once and for all. And it doesn't mean that we'll never experience like the effects, like him being defensive and protective doesn't mean that we'll never experience hurt or loss on this side of eternity, right? Because we all know that to be like, we've all experienced moments of grieving and mourning. And even, as Mark was mentioning, like in Nashville, seeing that horrible tragedy unfold and hearing about what's happened in Juarez, like we see that, man, there is great moments of grieving and mourning. But the protective nature is God's like, hey, I'm not going to have evil have the last say. I'm not going to let evil have the last say. And he wants us to trust that he's not turning a blind eye to evil in our world, but that he has a plan of dealing with it and undoing all the harm it has caused in his good world. One of my favorite passages comes out of Revelation 21. And it's just a really great, when we've been talking about God's purpose to redeem, if we can just show this real quick. It's a really amazing passage. And this is kind of revealing, hey, when we talk about what's God's plan? What's he going to do? Let me just read this to us. He says, and this is him speaking to John in Revelation. He says, then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and there was no longer any sea. I saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride beautifully dressed for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, "Look, God's dwelling place is now among the people, and he will dwell with them. They will be his people, and God himself will be with them and be their God. He will wipe away every tear from their eyes, and there will be no more death or mourning or crying or pain, for the old order of things has passed away." Now that's good news. And I don't know about you, I can't, like that, especially when I read that last part when he talks about like to wipe away every tear from every eye. There'll be no more death or mourning or crying or pain. And what God wants us to, he says, guys, this is kind of my purpose. This is my heart and my plan of undoing all the evil, all of the brokenness. And so we know that this is God's ultimate plan to deal with evil. And he tells us, but he also tells us in the meantime that while we wait for this ultimate purpose to unfold, while we wait for that, while we're waiting for God to really kind of bring this to full fruition, He also isn't just going to leave us to deal with the hurts and the grieving to our own. He says that he'll actually tend to our wounds like a loving shepherd. He'll pick us up in his arm. He'll comfort us and care for us. And because of that, he says we can have comfort. We can hold these two realities of knowing that God's going to deal with evil once and for all, and he's going to comfort us. And he doesn't leave us to deal with our hurts and wounds by ourselves. He's there to kind of comfort us in the midst of that. You know, when I was a kid, I have an older brother. I have two older brothers, and my middle brother, his name is Ricky. We called him Bubba, and we didn't get along super well when I was younger. He used to kind of pick on me until I outgrew him, like by like 6 inches, and so now the tables have turned a little bit. But he used to. I remember as a kid, like he used to pick on me, but there was a moment I remember where I was out playing, and I scraped up my knee, and I was crying, and he had heard me, and he came outside, and he literally just picked me up, and he scooped me up in his arms, and he walked me back in the house. And I remember, like, as a brother, like, it was, like, that was kind of one of those moments where I realized, like, you know, my brother can be kind of a turd sometimes, right? But I also, like, the cool thing in that moment is I realized that I had this comfort now in my older brother, that I knew that, man, even when I scraped my knee or something like that, I knew he was going to be there for me. And I knew that he would be one that he would come for me, he'd care for me, and he's done that for me over the years, right? And we've actually done that for each other. We've been there for each other. But it was just that moment where I could have complete trust in my brother, knowing like, hey, he's going to be there for me. He's going to care for me. When I scrape up my knee or something happens, I can have comfort knowing that he's there with me. And so as Isaiah's looking at it, he's like, here's, man, like, I know that life is difficult. I know your situation is difficult, but take comfort. Right? I love that in verse 40, there's that shift in the tone. He says, man, take comfort. And he gives these reasons for why we should have comfort. And maybe you're asking, man, why this on Palm Sunday? Right? Why are we talking about this on Palm Sunday? And I love, because if you know, on Palm Sunday, right, we talk about Jesus entering in Jerusalem. Right? And as Jesus was entering into the city of Jerusalem, like, he was reminding people that God had not forgotten about them, right? He was reminding people that had been oppressed by Rome and experienced massive persecution, that he's like, hey, God hasn't forgotten about you. And even though they were experiencing intense and horrible things, that he was serving as that reminder of Revelation 21, that God's plan is still in full effect. It is still in motion. But I think that's also true for us. Right? That as we're sitting on Palm Sunday, my hope is as we're reading through this and we're reading through these things that, yeah, God was speaking to a specific group of people that were dealing with something, that they were dealing with some real things that were happening in their life, but also dealing with, I mean, how do we be reconciled with God? But I think for us, as we think about Palm Sunday, I think there's a great reminder that, hey, that God has not forgotten. That there's a massive, that God's plan of redemption is still in motion. And that he wants us to take comfort in him. Even when the world around us seems bleak and dark, we can take comfort in him. And so what does that mean, right? What are the ways that when we think about people in 2023, how do we take comfort in God? How do we take this message of comfort and finding and trusting and having hope in Jesus, how do we kind of take that with us? And I say there's three things I want us to be thinking about this morning. Is number one, recognizing that we have grace in Him. Right? That I don't know every single one of us in this room, I don't know what our backgrounds are, but the truth is, right, that just like with the people of Judah, God's hope for us is redemption, not destruction. Right? God's hope for us is to be redeemed, to be with Him. And so we can entrust Him with our whole lives knowing that. That what God's hope for us is redemption. God's hope for us is to be with Him and to have our trust and hope in Him. And number two, that God's purpose will prevail. Right? That thing, when we're talking about Revelation 21, that recognizing that's a reality that will someday come to pass, that will come to full fruition, and nothing can stop that. And because of that, we can take comfort knowing that and not be overcome by the evil around us, not be overcome by the brokenness and the sorrow, knowing that God has a purpose and it will prevail, and there's nobody and nothing in this world that can stop it. But also finding hope, comfort in the fact that God is the ultimate shepherd. That even though we know that we will experience pain, we will experience suffering in this world, we know that we don't have to do it alone. And that God's with us. He comforts us in our mourning. He comforts us in our grief. And that He tends to our wounds. He tends to our brokenness. And so my hope is that as we think about this passage, that you guys, just as this was for Judah, my hope is that for us in 2023, we can look at this passage, we can think about Palm Sunday and be comforted, to have encouragement, to know that, man, that with God there's nothing that can keep us from Him, and that His purpose will always prevail, and that He's always there to comfort us in our sorrow and our pain. And so, thought for the drive home that I want you guys to be thinking about is, in what area of your life do you need God's hope and comfort? What are the areas in your life where you need God's hope and comfort? Right? Is it, maybe there's something that's really heavy that you're dealing with that is hitting really close to home, loss of a loved one. Just, I know we talk about like struggles with work, employment, things like that. Where do you need God's hope and comfort? Or is it, or maybe it is the feeling of just over this disaster fatigue. Maybe you turn on the news, you're like, man, it just seems like evil is all around me, that brokenness is all around me. And you find yourself just getting weighed down in that. Where do you need God's hope and comfort? Of not pretending that evil's not there, right? But trusting and saying, God, I know that in You I can put my trust, in You I can put my hope. And knowing that that's something that can't be taken away. And so actually here in a bit, we get to actually celebrate that comfort and hope as we come around this table. And we're reminded of what Jesus, of the life and death and resurrection of Jesus, and how looking at His life and what He did for us, how we get to be pointed to that hope and comfort. And so we're going to, here in a second, we're going to do that as a church family. We're going to gather around this table and be reminded of the hope and comfort we have in Jesus. And so I'm going to invite our servers to come on up and prepare to hand out the elements for communion. And so I'm going to pray, as we're doing that, I'm going to pray as we enter into this time of communion together. And if you haven't been with us, done with us before, we'll have you guys come down the center aisle and then come back to your seat, and then we'll take communion together. But let's just pray as we enter into this time together. God, we're just so reminded of You, of the hope that we have in You, the comfort we have in You, and as we take these elements, a reminder of Your body and Your blood that have been poured out for us. Pray that we can be reminded of that same hope and comfort that You spoke to the people of Judah, but also that You want us to be reminded of in You. So Lord, we love You. We say this all in Your name. Amen. So as you guys feel led, you can come on up the center aisle, and then we'll take the elements together.